Okay, this is the last of the videos I'm going to record, although there's one more video to watch in terms of that I didn't record that I'm going to refer you to, and I'll talk about that at the end of this slideshow. So, one of the things that we have to consider is America full? Do we have enough people and we don't need any more? This was one of the things that Trump promoted in 2016, and it's the basis of restricting immigration, both legal and undocumented immigration, is that the idea that we have enough people and we don't want any more. 3% of America's land is urbanized, meaning we have the potential of absorbing a lot more people in America if the economy, matches the incoming people. And from places like Southern California and other hot coastal places, it seems like there's no more room. And because, in Orange County, there's very, very little vacant land. And so everything we do is about increasing density because there's just no more land. But places like Southern California are very, very different than the rest of the country in terms of just actual space. 80% of counties in the United States have lost population in the last 10 years. And Governor Phil Scott in Vermont said, I believe our biggest threat is our declining labor force in terms of the actual number of people in the labor force. And if you think about just, things that used to be really high labor needs have really reduced. For instance, farming. In the old system, it required a lot more people to harvest crops. When we have big ag, when we have industrial farming, we just don't need as many people because we've replaced that with a lot of high tech. In the farm, and this is true of factories. Factories now need a lot fewer people to produce the same amount of goods because you have robotics and other kinds of technology. Um, the new economy jobs require that there is a population corporation synergy, that the population kind of fits the kind of people we need to run those things. And so we have, and this works on two different levels. One is that Microsoft and Google need coders, and so it's really important that those local economies produce coders. But it's also important that those kind of economies work for lower income service people as well, because nobody wants to live in a city made up entirely of coders. That means you have no coffee shops. It means you have no retail of any kind. You don't have dry cleaners. You don't have people to clean your houses and wash your um, watch your kids. You don't have um, you do, and in some places you don't even have teachers. Kind of a middle class professional in the Silicon Valley. They're really struggling to be able to afford teachers because teachers just don't make enough to live in the cities, and so that that um, that synergy is really an important kind of consideration for municipalities. Then another thing we have to look at is kind of how population grows. Um, in the near term, and again, this is pre-coronavirus, we were looking at 0.5% workforce growth, and that economic growth was a third less than the 1950 to 2000 rate. So one of the problems in terms of, and this is why I really say that um, um, we were full, is because we weren't growing at have the same kind of workforce work need for additional people, and we also had less economic growth in general. Between 2010 and 2018, the 0 to 18 population declined by 780,000 people, or 1% decline in young people in the population. We also had negative population growth in 29 states. 4 states lost more than 10% of their population after 2010. and states that gained children had overall net population increases. And so if you see the number of 0 to 18-year-olds going up, it also means that you see well, if you see the population growing, you're also going to see 0 to 18 population growing. So places that are getting older are shrinking. That's basically what they say. When you have declining population, you have decreasing home values, weak public finances, and this creates a death spiral that's really hard to extract yourself from. There are some cities that are embracing immigration, even as the national mood has turned against it. So, Baltimore, Maryland, Fargo, North Dakota, Indianapolis, Indiana have all been really big supporters of immigration, even though kind of the surrounding communities are more hostile to it. Um, in terms of what has happened on a regional basis, California during this period grew by 6.2%. California was still a net growth area. Most of this kind of growth happened in the South and West, whereas the Northeast and Midwest, outside of the Acela corridor, really shrunk. The Acela corridor is that area of cities between Boston and Washington D.C. Where there was real growth, but outside of that Boston to D.C. kind of stretch, there was major shrinkage in the Northeast and Midwest. Pensions also are a challenge to growth in terms of as the population ages, much more of city budgets are going to paying for pensions. Pension obligations have not been fully funded and are going to stretch budgets in the future, some of which to the breaking point. And so Austin, Texas has largely been a success story. They've had lots of growth. They've had lots of high income kind of growth. They've been able to grow their tax base quite a bit. However, in this period, pension contributions went up 83%. And some of this was hiring new employees to meet growth. Most of it was just the overall cost of pensions. So while pension contributions go up 83%, operating budgets only go up 27%, which means that the kind of flexibility that Austin might have thought that they were going to have from growth just isn't there. And this creates a paradox. In growing services, there is more financial burden on public employees. The cities require more services, and the cities themselves need to compete with the private sector in terms of salaries and benefits. And so that's kind of one of the paradoxes of growth. Of course, Loyalton, California would tell you they would take a paradox of growth anytime. This is a city in California of 780 residents. The city has 1 employee and 4 retirees. Their budget is about $1 million. The city realized that they could not continue putting funds into CalPERS, which is the California retirement system, and they tried to pull out of it. When they tried to pull out of it, CalPERS said you have a $1.6 million underfunded obligation that you have to take on. And so in order to pull out of CalPERS without any disruption to your existing retirees, you have to pay $1.6 million, which is $600,000 than their entire city budget. And when they could not meet those CalPERS obligations, their retirees retirement was cut. And so one retiree, one city employee retiree who was getting $2,500 a month got his pension cut by 60%. And so how can Loyalton pursue any kind of economic development and reverse the death spiral when they've got these kind of pension obligations? So the final video you're going to watch today is a John Oliver video. It's about 20 minutes long. So quite profane, but it provides kind of a different perspective to the boosterism that we tend to see in terms of economic development. And I think it's really a great example of economic development, of the downsides of economic development. And I wanted to present that perspective to you. And the John Oliver does it way better than I could. So I want you to watch that video. And then you've got one more question about economic development to answer in terms of kind of your thoughts.